Morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay. I had some technical difficulties, but let's get started. This week we're gonna work, or this, I guess the next few weeks we're gonna be working on this render here. I did provide a reference image on the Discord channel. So this is what we're going to be building. But just to give you some context on how I built this. So there's a lot of faking in this render. As you can see, the stand that this mushroom house is on, there's a few missing pillars here below, and that's intentional. I didn't have enough room to create those, but from the front view you can't really see. Also with the water here, it's a little bit, it's not as like horizontally the same level as this ground plane here, but it doesn't matter when you're in the camera view, as you can see. For this one, I wanted to also get into it lighting and just creating a composition overall. This one has a lot of light sources. I think there's about 7, 8, maybe more here. There's about 3 or 4 in the scene as well. So yeah, we're gonna be building this from scratch. Hopefully we can get it done within 3 sessions. That's why I ended the second render earlier than usual. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And I'm just gonna have this on the side so I can refer back to it. But if you haven't already, open up a new Blender file. And from here, just delete all the default objects you have in the scene. And we're gonna go ahead and create a plane that's gonna act as the background layer. And before I jump into that, let's I'm just gonna insert the image to refer to. This is something I covered in the very first session, but if you drag from the edge or one of these corners of the panel, you'll be able to get a new panel. And then I'm just gonna open up image editor from here. You don't have to necessarily follow this. This is just me trying to set up a reference image, but you'll have the exact steps in the video if you wanted to follow it later. And once you hit image open, there's gonna be an additional window. You can't see it in my stream at the moment, but you just navigate towards the image you want to open and click on it. And that'll appear here in this panel. So yeah, this background plane is the surrounding blue background. So I'm just gonna scale that up. So that's S, maybe to 20 for now. So just so we fill that whole area. And then let's go ahead and create that ground plane first. So again, another plane on top of that. And let's scale that by 4. Let me just enable my hotkeys here. Okay, so let's enable that by 4 times. So scale, S for scale, 4. Enter to submit that. And then from here, let's extrude it. So I'm going into the side view or the front view, hitting the tab for edit mode, and then extruding it by, let's say, 1 block. And then from here, let's go ahead and shape the terrain a little bit. So there's a lot of random curves in the terrain, but there's also a little dip here for the water. We will go ahead and create that dip first. We're gonna worry about the random curves in the terrain later. But let's go into edit mode. Let's subdivide this. So that's, or sorry, let's create some loop cuts. So that's Control R. Increase it by, right now I have 12 times. Wait, let's do 16. Oops. Wonder if I can use the numpad. Oh, you can definitely use the numpad, which is something I just learned. Just hit 1.6 on your numpad. And we're basically creating more geometry for the terrain to curve. And then from this point, let's go to front view or side view. Go to wireframe mode. And then select the vertices at the bottom here. We want those to stay as is. We don't want to affect that when we're creating the curve. So we're just going to hide it. And you can hit H to hide. So whatever we do with these top vertices, it's not going to affect the bottom. And then from here, let's go and select the first few here. I guess the ones that are in the front in camera view. And I'm just going to turn on proportional editing. So that's this button here, O on your keyboard if you want to learn the hotkeys. And then we're just gonna move that down. So G, Z, and I'm just gonna increase the amount of influence we're giving with the scroll wheel on your mouse. And it's better if I did this in front view or side view just to get a better glimpse. So just lower that along with the surrounding vertices here. Get that nice curve. Okay, we'll leave it like that for now. We just want to make room or know where the water is going to go roughly so we can place the house. Okay, let's go to solid mode. So this is going to be our water area. We're going to place the house here. So let's go ahead and create a cylinder. And I think 32 cuts are fine. So let's leave that as is. And then I'm just gonna move this over to the corner. And then move it up as well. And for this one, I'm gonna go a little bit slower just because it's a more advanced render. Hopefully you can follow. If not, feel free to let me know in the chat, or you can also watch the recording after. So from here, let's create some loop cuts. So we want to create it so that we have the bottom here and the top, but also there's a little bit of a tilt. So somewhere in this cylinder, we're gonna have to have room to make that tilt without having the geometry overlap with each other. And you'll see what that means in a bit. But let's go ahead and create about 8 loop cuts. And we also might want to scale it up a little bit. So once you've created the loop cuts, hit A to select all. And then we're gonna scale it, but let's turn off proportional editing first. And let's scale it up a little bit. About this much. And I'm gonna also decrease it in height. Okay, once you've done that, let's go ahead and select the first, I guess the four top rows here. And then we're just gonna increase it in height. So increase that row in height. This is gonna be our top section. This is gonna be the bottom section. Okay, once you've done that, I'm gonna extrude the top rows along the normals. So just select the top 4 rows, Alt-E for extrude options, or you can right click and it should be here. Alt-E, extrude faces along normals. Okay, once you've done that, this shape might look a little bit wonky, but I'm just gonna adjust that. We want to evenly distribute these edge loops. So you wanna bring them up. So what I'm gonna do is select these 3. And then if you hit G twice, that's gonna move it along the normals. So let's place the first one here. Place the second one up here. So you get 3 evenly distributed loops. And then from here, let's select this top layer, or this top face. And we're gonna have to scale it down a little bit. So we can do it either way. We can either start creating insets like so, or we can also scale it down and then create edge loops in between. We're gonna go with the second method, so just scale that down and then create a few more edge loops here on the top. 3 edge loops. And then escape. And I'm just gonna turn on proportional editing again. So that's this one here. O on your keyboard. And let's increase the top layers in height. So you want to make sure that area of influence, this circle here, touches this edge loop, but it doesn't go further down. Okay, and then now we're just gonna curve this out a little bit. Let's select this edge loop, press S for scale, and I am gonna have proportional editing on for the first bit, but I'm gonna turn it off because we wanna adjust just this one at one point. So scale that down. So now you can see we're roughly getting to that shape. And then I want to make this go down a little bit. You find tweaks here and there. once you've done that, let's select this loop. And before I do anything, I'm just gonna make sure scale value is uniform. Go back into edit mode, Control B, and let's just create bevels here. Creating 4 faces there. And then if you see in the reference image, there's a little bit of a, it's not completely uniform, so there's a little dent going towards the top. So we're gonna create that little inset or dent. Just select one of these edge loops, or let's select this face here. Enable proportional editing again, and we're just gonna decrease this is where we're at now, and the roof overall is a little bit, it's a little bit bigger in height than this reference, so we're gonna make it a little bit shorter. Press 1 on your numpad, 1 or 3, doesn't really matter if you're in front or side view at this point, and then select everything that's part of your roof. And then with proportional editing on, scale Z, and that's gonna scale this down a little bit. I'm also gonna adjust the height, just bring that down. Go into solid mode again. And I'm just gonna shade smooth. You'll notice the root of this house is also a little bit wider than when it goes towards the top, towards the roof. So we're gonna create that as well. Let's select this edge loop here. Maybe this one too, so these two. And then proportional editing, scale down, and this is a matter of preference, but if you wanted to scale it down even further, please do so. I'm just gonna scale it so that it matches what I think looks best. And at the very bottom here, I just want to create a loop cut or a bevel. So select that edge loop, Control B. And at this point, it's a matter of tweaking the shape. I'm just gonna tweak slightly. And I want to create a little bit more curve on this section of the roof, so I'm just going to select this one, Control B. And then we're definitely going to need more geometry on the top here. It's looking a little bit flat, so just create an inset and raise that up. And we want to make sure there's loops all around, evenly distributed. There's a little bit more room here and here. So I'm just going to create another bevel. So Control B. And just make sure that I have enough geometry to play around with later. Okay, from here, let's select the top faces in wireframe view. And we're gonna create that tilt for the roof. So I am in front view, that's numpad 1, and just gonna rotate it slightly. And when you do, you'll notice the base gets a little wonky. I'm just gonna drag that back. And we'll do the same thing in the side view. So numpad 3, and then tilt it this way and drag it back in place. So we have that tilt. From here, let's create the door and windows. Go back to solid view. Looking at it, it does look a little bit higher. The base looks a bit higher, so I'm just gonna drag that down. Like so. And just make sure that these two vertices don't overlap. And you might, depending on how high your house is, you might want to create another loop cut here. Okay, now we are gonna go ahead and create the door. I'm gonna go ahead and select a few of these faces on the mushroom. We're just gonna use existing geometry. And before I do that, I'm just gonna actually, let's make this a bit easier. We're just gonna create another plane for the door. So let's go ahead and if you do shift right click, we're gonna orient the 3D cursor to land on the front part of the space. That's where our door is gonna be. And let's create a plane. I'm gonna rotate that by 90 degrees and 45 on the z-axis. I'm just trying to think. Maybe it's better to just use existing geometry at this point. I think we might get into some weird issues, so apologies. Let's go back. Let's go back and select some of these faces here. So I'm selecting these here. And then I'm gonna hit Shift D to duplicate, Enter to confirm that, and then just separating it out. So if you hit P and separate by selection, that selection we just created, that's gonna be separated out. So if you go to object mode, these are two different objects now. I wanna select the door. go into edit mode. And we're going to create the frame first. And let's extrude. And I know in the reference image there's a bit of an angle on the door, but I'm gonna create that as a curve instead. So select these two edges, and then let's bevel that out. I'm going to create 4 cuts, or 3 cuts, 4 faces. And I'm also going to move that down. Actually, I'm going to move this guy up. So select this top face, enable proportional editing, and I'm just going to move that up. And I think this top portion is a little bit higher, so I'm just gonna select this face here, hit Control, and Blender is not having a good time with selection. So I'm just gonna select the middle here, and then with Control down, I'm gonna select this one. And we're basically telling Blender to select from A to B. Sometimes they have the tool has a problem selecting or finding out which path you want to take. So sometimes you have to select the midpoint to do that. With that being done, I'm just gonna pull that down a little bit and gonna disable proportional editing first. And by doing this, we have something that is called n-gons, and this is when a face has more than 4 corners, I believe. This is not ideal for creating game assets. You don't want to have n-gons because that will mess up your assets when you bring them into Unity or Unreal. But for now, this is for illustrative purposes. We're not going to worry about that too much. I'm just going to bring these two in slightly. And now we're just going to create that frame or that inset. So with the front faces selected, let's hit I. Bring it in. Don't bring it in too much, otherwise you're going to have weird issues like this. And then let's extrude it back. And we don't have to extrude it too much, just a little bit. And we're gonna fake this lighting too. This is just light coming out from this face here, which we'll get into in a little bit. But for now, let's extrude it in. Yes, we will be doing the water material later. Probably not today, but maybe in the next 2 weeks. Okay, with that done, I'm going to select these faces here and duplicate in place, and I'm going to separate that again. And before we move further, I'm just gonna auto smooth this. Once you've done that, let's select the duplicated faces and I am going to... I don't know if we've covered this, but we're gonna use the snap tool. This is a tool you use when you want geometry to snap to a certain point in your viewport. So if you hit the drop down, there's a bunch of options here. We want our selection to snap to face. So select face. And if you don't have any of these options enabled, just enable these. And then what I want to do is select this edge here. I'm doing alt click to select just this side. And I'm just going to move that a little bit to the left. And as you can see, this snap tool, it's enabling us to make sure that it's flush to the surface. And I'm just gonna make that thinner. Okay, and I think I'm having some weird issues here. Let me go back. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, once you've done that, let's extrude it out. Oh, and before you extrude, you want to make sure that the snap tool is off. Otherwise, it's not gonna come out. It's just gonna be snapped to the surface. So extrude it. And let's also turn on auto smooth for this one. And I'm just gonna extrude it out until it hits. It doesn't quite hit the edge, but so it's closer to that edge. And then with that done, I'm just gonna duplicate this. And move it to the side slightly. And you'll notice the origin point is far off. If you want to bring them back, right click, set origin to geometry. And that way, when you make changes to this, you're gonna make it so that it's relative to this object. Before we do that, I think my width panel is looking a little bit weird, so I'm just gonna adjust it slightly. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so what I've done is I just made that thicker and then made it so that the top goes into the door. So when we create additional wood panels, some of them might be sticking out, and I want to avoid that. So I've just made it so it goes into the wood frame there. And we're just gonna duplicate that. Move it to the side a little bit, and then I'm gonna rotate it. And there's there's gonna be inconsistent gaps here, which I think is fine. I think that makes it look more genuine, more authentic. If you look at my image reference, I have inconsistent gaps as well. And then let's just duplicate these faces, rotate it slightly. And we might have to tweak these later. I might want to go ahead, go do that after this workshop, but I might want to decrease some of the gaps here. But for now, we're just gonna create the 4 panels first. And when you're tweaking faces inside an object, you might want to turn on wireframe mode, and just make sure that you're selecting the right face and you're making those edits. Okay, it's not looking perfect, but we'll leave it like this for now. I do want to create some bevels here, some very slight bevels, so it doesn't look too, like these edges aren't too sharp. So let's go ahead and create that. Select these 2 edge loops. So I'm hitting Alt to select these. Control B and just create that slight bevel. So my snap settings are looking like this. If you have a different version of Blender, this might not look the same. I believe it was different in previous versions, so you might want to go to Blender's website and update it. Okay, once that's done, I could go ahead and create the bevels for these 2. These edges are looking sharp, but we won't do that right now. I am gonna go ahead and create this window on the door. And before I do that, let's create more room for it. So let's just select these 4 wood panels and go ahead and select the front faces only. And I'm gonna inset that in, and I have snapping enabled, so I need to turn that off. And when I'm moving these, I'm excluding Z from my movement. So that's Shift Z, and you'll only get X and Y axes to play around with. So I'm just putting that in a little bit. And as I did that, this corner is sticking out. So I want to go into wireframe mode and just pull that in. Just make sure everything's enclosed in this frame. And then let's go ahead and create a circle here. Let's snap to one of the wood panels, because when we spawn a circle, it's not gonna be completely flush to this. So I'm just gonna enable snapping and then Shift A, circle. And you want to fill that circle first before we do anything. So just go into edit mode, hit F with everything selected, and that's going to fill your selection. and then scale down. And with snapping on, I'm gonna hit G, and once you do, oh, we do want to enable one setting here, align rotation to target, this one. And what that's gonna do is orient your face so that it's properly oriented to this surface. And when I'm doing that, you'll notice this orange cursor with the line. You're basically setting your rotation to this surface, like this point of your cursor. So once it's somewhat aligned with your wood panels, might want to tweak it a little bit. I'm just rotating it along the Z. And I'm gonna scale it down so it fits within these two panels. It'll be weird if it just sticks out and it cuts into the gap here. Okay, once that's done, I'm gonna hit tab to go into edit mode, and before I extrude, I'm gonna disable snapping. Hit E for extrude. Then create inset, I for inset. And then extrude it back, E. And we just want to extrude it so that we don't see the wood panels behind. So get to a point where you don't see the panels. And then we're gonna go ahead and select two faces that are facing each other in this cylinder. What we're gonna do is we're gonna bridge these. We're gonna create faces to fill these two so that we have the window frame here in the center. So select these two or whichever face you want to bridge, and I'm gonna hit Shift D, enter, and then I'm gonna separate that. So there's gonna be a lot of using existing geometry and duplicating it in this scene. So once you've done that, I am selecting what we just duplicated. And I'm just gonna bridge those two. And if you don't have that bridge loop tools enabled, you want to go into preferences, into add-ons, and search for loop tools, and you'll be able to enable that. We did this last week, so I think most of you might have it on already. But I'm just gonna inset this. And also rotate it along. Rotate it slightly so it's 90 degrees. I'm gonna scale it a little bit just to make it thicker, and then scale it down on the Z. And for anything that's inside the frame, you want to go into wireframe mode and bring those in. Also, I don't think these two are filled. These might be... there's no face applied to this edge. So let's just go ahead and do that. Select these two edges in wireframe mode and hit F. That's gonna fill those edges. And just tweaking it so it's 90 degrees again. And we'll do the same thing for the horizontal frame here. Select two faces that face each other. Shift D, duplicate and separate. Tab out and then select what we just duplicated. A to select all and right click bridge. And for this one, I want to make sure that it's aligned with this frame somewhat. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I also want to rotate it so it's horizontal. And when you're making your rotations, it's gonna rotate based on how your cameras or how you're looking at this face. So if you're not fixing this against an axis, then it's just gonna rotate depending on your camera view or how you're looking at this object. So if I'm looking at it at this point and I rotate it, it's gonna rotate at a certain angle relative to that viewport angle. Same with this one. So what I do is I want to make sure that I'm viewing it from the front and then I'm rotating it. And then when I scale it up, scale won't matter too much actually, just a rotation. Same with move though. If you move it, it's gonna move relative to how you're looking at this object. If I look at it this way, it's gonna come out. If I look at it this way, it's gonna come out this way. But it is easiest if you can fix it to an axis. Right now, we're not able to do that, so just using what we can. And then I'm gonna go into wireframe view, select these two edges, and fill those as well. And then going back to the front view of this, I'm just gonna pull this side in. As I was tweaking it, it kind of came out. And then also, this front face is slightly above the back face, so I'm just gonna bring it down. Bring this up a little bit. And you should be at this point of the render. Let's add some bevels to this frame here. So I'm just gonna select the cylinder, select these two loops by hitting Alt and left mouse click, and then Control B. And I want to shade smooth that. Shade smooth, auto smooth. Okay, and then if you wanted to go ahead and do that for these wooden panels, you can do that too. I'll go ahead and do mine. So I'm just going to wireframe view, selecting the front edges only. And the reason why I'm doing just the front is because everything else is gonna be enclosed in the frame. It's not gonna be in view. So there's no reason to create more geometry. That's just gonna increase your render time. So I'm just gonna select these edges and Control B. And again, I don't think there's a big difference if you don't have these, just because when we're zoomed out, you're probably not gonna see that. It's not gonna be too noticeable, but I will do that anyways. So with that, we are at the halfway point. We're almost at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Did you all want to have a break? If not, we can continue. Okay, it's IC. Okay, let's continue. But in your own time, I encourage you to make those tweaks. There's gonna be some steps we skip, but I think it's fine. There are, like, we've learned Blender enough to, and I think you can make those tweaks on your own. So this door, we'll call it done for now, but feel free to change it in your own time. I'm going to, before we call it done, I'm just gonna move it down just so it's flush to the bottom here. Maybe even bring it into the mushroom a little bit. Okay. Let's move on to this window here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and select some of these faces on the mushroom. Let's select these two 2x2 faces. Shift D, duplicate, and P to separate it out. And before we go further and start editing, I want to make it higher in height. So let's go ahead and do, let's use the snapping tool. Select these vertices or this edge and bring it up slightly. And then you can select this middle point and let's bring it down. I want to create another edge or a cut here so that we can create a bevel and curve the top left and right corners. So create another cut. So you have 3 faces going down. And let's select these 2 vertices. If you don't see it, go to wireframe mode. Select those 2. And Control B. And you want to hit V for vertices. Okay, once you've done that, I'm gonna hit A and extrude everything out. And I always forget to disable snap, so disable that, extrude it out. And for this one, I actually think I want to make this a flat surface instead. Right now it's a bit curvy because we duplicated from this surface. But I'm gonna go ahead and flatten this out. So if you select the front face and also the back face, we want to flatten that out too. So select those 2 faces, or select the front first. But if you wanted to do the back face, we'll have to go and isolate that view. That's / on your numpad. But with the front face selected, hit SY 0, and we're just flattening the surface on the Y there. Same for the back face, SY 0. And if you haven't already, turn on auto smooth. And I'm just gonna bring this up slightly, the back face, so that we have a nice even window, front and back. And this one is relatively easier to tweak because it is flat against the Y. So we can use this, the Y or the X axis, to rotate it and do stuff. But before we do, let's bring the origin point back to the window. Right now, whatever we duplicate from this mushroom, it's gonna just copy this origin point. So we're gonna have to bring it back to, or bring it to where we duplicated the face. So right click, origin to geometry. And then from here, if we make tweaks, that's gonna rotate based on that origin point. Okay, let's do RX and make it rotated on that surface. Just orient it based on your mushroom base. And then I'm also gonna bring it back a little bit. So I'm hitting G for move and then Y twice. And because we've rotated on the X first, it's gonna rotate on the local Y axis. So if I do GY, this is the global axis. But if I hit Y again, it's gonna rotate on the local axis. And that local axis is applied based on the rotation we made on X. This is a pretty complex topic, but I think once you practice it enough, you'll get the hang of it. I didn't know what local and global axis meant until I actually started creating my own renders. But we're at this point now, so let's leave my centers a little bit off. So I'm just gonna bring it up. And it's looking a little bit wider than I wanted, so I'm just gonna scale it down on my X. Feel free to scale it on your Z too if you want to make it shorter. And if you want to bring it up, feel free to do that too. Since we have rotated on the X a little bit, whatever local change we make, it's gonna rotate on that, or be oriented on that mushroom base. So you always want to move it along the local axis. So that's G, Z twice, or X twice, and it's gonna move in and out. Let's select the front face and set it like we did with the door. And actually, I am not liking the width of this, so I'm just gonna bring it in like a little bit more. And then I'm gonna extrude it in just so I don't see the mushroom. And then I'm also going to bevel this on the edges. Like so. And then I'm just gonna increase the auto smooth angle here to remove those artifacts. Nothing on this door, so I think this is good to go. Okay, awesome. Now we're at the point where we can start adding these white dots on the roof. Okay, so I'm gonna put my 3D cursor on one point of the roof. And I'm gonna spawn or add a circle. And with circles, there's no face in it, so you're gonna have to fill it yourself. And let's scale that down. With this one, we're gonna want it to snap on an angle of the roof. Make sure you have align rotation to target on. And then hit G and you'll see that it starts rotating on the surface. Actually, I should have had center on. So snap with center, and that's gonna center your face to your cursor. Makes it easier to place things. Okay, once you've done that, I'm gonna hit tab, go into edit mode, and let's extrude that. And again, I forgot to disable snapping. Extrude it out. And what I'm gonna do now is make it so it's flatter while I bring in the center. So with the top face selected, just hit S and bring it in. Once you've done that, we are going to make this go into the roof a little bit, so the height is not a big deal. But let's inset it a couple times and try to make those insets as even as possible. If you want to tweak it afterwards, just hit one of those loops and then hit G twice. It's gonna move along your surface. And then for this edge, we want to actually select the center face there. Hit proportional editing or O on your keyboard. And if I hit G and Z twice, it's gonna bring it out. And just bring it out slightly. We might want to bevel this edge so that it's not a sharp angle. So once you've brought that out a little bit, turn off proportional editing, select the edge there, and you can either scale it down or bring it out a little bit and bevel. So let's just bevel it once. And then you'll notice these dots aren't perfect circles like we have in our render here. So I'm just trying to figure out Grace's question here. Let me try that. So you want to make sure center is on. I notice closest is on for you. And then everything else looks identical, so it should work. Once you hit center, it's gonna be easier to tweak things because you're centering the face onto your cursor. Okay, cool. So yeah, these dots aren't perfect circles. So we want to tweak them. We can turn on proportional editing, turn off snapping. For snapping, it's, I believe that is tab or shift tab. Yeah, shift tab. That's the hotkey for that. O is for proportional editing. And what I want to do is just tweak this surface so that it's not a perfect circle. So just bring it out here and there. And you want to make sure that the angle that you're viewing this object is somewhat from a front point of view, like a frontal point of view. So if I bring this a little bit sideways from this point, later on, you're gonna have problems where it's not gonna be flat on, or not flat, but like the orientation will be a little bit off compared to your roof. So when I do this, I wanna make sure that my camera view is somewhat frontal to this face or this object, and then I can pull it out. So from here, I'm not gonna guide you through exactly what I'm doing. I think this can be based on your creativity. So feel free to create your own custom shapes. And if you haven't already, shade smooth and auto smooth. One thing I realized is we should have copied that circle all around. So because we're gonna be doing this for the rest of the render, we're just gonna create 2 during the workshop, and then I'd encourage you to fill out the blank spaces later. For now, I'm just gonna create 1 here and 1 maybe somewhere here. I do have other spots in the snow. They're just not showing. I added the snow detail later. That wasn't in the initial plan, but again, for this one, fill that circle. Make sure you have snapping with these settings, and just snap it to a specific area of your mushroom. And feel free to change the sizes of your circles too. Extrude that out. And this is what I meant. So if you have one circle, you want to make sure that you copy these all around, so later you don't have to start from scratch. And when you're moving them around, make sure you're snapping to face. And then from there, you can scale it up, do whatever you want based on your preference. And then maybe I'll just bring one of the pre-made spots and put them here. And then I can just rotate it. Rotate it slightly, and then if I snap it again, it's gonna give a different type of shape to this. Just to go over how to do that spot again, I am bringing this center face out using proportional editing. And I want to make sure that I'm editing it out from the local Z axis. And I think it's a little too thick, so I'm just gonna decrease the height a bit. And then this bevel I'm gonna decrease slightly. And if you wanted to decrease the height overall, you can select everything and just scale on Z twice, the local Z axis, and then just bring that in. Then again, from the front view of this object, just gonna bring them out in a couple areas using proportional editing. Maybe bring this side in. You also want to make sure that they vary in size and shape. So as I'm placing these cylinders, I'm making sure I vary the size, at least for now. And now, since they all have their own local axes, there's a neat trick here. What you can do is select everything and inset everything at once, like so. And then once you've done that, this portion you don't have to follow. I'm just showing you a trick. But if I hit Z twice, oh, it actually does not work. Okay, never mind. You might have to create these separately, but my intention for that was if I selected everything and hit G twice, they would all tweak based on their own local axis. I remember this did work at one point. I just don't remember how I did it. It might be this actually. Okay, let me go back and try this again. There we go. Okay, so what I did is I hit normal in transform orientation. And then with proportional editing on, I hit G. If you do it once, if you do it twice, you'll get this where each face tweaks based on their own angle. And then from there you can tweak the bevels, tweak it so it looks nicer. But for now, let's leave it like this. Another thing is if one thing I wanted to do is select all of these spots. And if you do G, okay, G and then Z twice in object mode, you can see it kind of goes into the roof, which is what we want. We don't want those awkward gaps to to show. And then for each one, you might want to tweak it separately just because they're on a different surface. For example, this one, you'll see the back a little bit, so you can either push it in more or rotate it slightly. And as you're doing that, you'll notice that your spots look different because the mount that you're surfacing on top of the roof is different, so you'll get different shapes, which I think is a good thing. Makes your render look more interesting. Okay, so these spots I'll just leave as placeholders for now, but I'll go back into it later. And then let's create that chimney. So this is the same thing. We're just gonna create a cylinder here. So create that cylinder, scale it in, and for this one it doesn't necessarily have to snap to the surface actually, because you'll notice it's not parallel to that surface. We're creating it at another angle, so don't mind snapping at this point, but let's create that top bit first. So I'm just extruding the top face and then selecting this loop here. Extrude faces along normal. So that's Alt E for the hotkey. Scale that out. And for the inside, I want to inset it first because right now this top face is parallel to the bottom faces here. So I just want to inset it first, and then going to front view wireframe, I can extrude it down. And looking at it now, I do want to make that hole smaller, so just gonna scale it down a little bit and then pull it back up. Bring this down. And we have a chimney. So from here, remember to save. Grace, thanks for the reminder. Let's shade smooth, auto smooth, and just you want to make sure that it's rotated so the base is at least inside the roof. So I'm just gonna rotate it along the X and then the Y once more, but I want it to make it so it faces backwards from the camera. So something like this. You can tweak the position as well if you wanted to. I do want to make that lip a little bit thicker, so I'm just gonna select this bit here. So once you've made a selection and hit Ctrl+, that's gonna increase your selection in case you forgot. And I'm just gonna increase that in height. I might wanna select this one too. And then I wanna create a bevel on these edges here. So 1, 2, 3, the top and bottom of the slip, and then the inner loop here, bevel, like so. And I'm just gonna make a slight tweak here. I think this section of the mushroom is not what I wanted. But if you do make changes to that, you're gonna have to change the spots a little bit, maybe bring them out or bring them in depending on what you did. And then after this, let's go ahead and select this top face, and I'm just gonna increase the selection. So let's go up to here. And we're just gonna duplicate and create that snow layer. So Shift D, duplicate, P for separating that. And you have a nice separated face here. We're gonna use a new modifier. I don't think we've used it before, but if you go to the modifiers panel and select solidify, you can't see what it's doing now, but it is actually creating a bit more depth to this. So if I increase the thickness, it is creating a thickness inside. Let's offset it so it goes the opposite way. So we're gonna create some thickness to the snow, 0.07 maybe, 0.06. If you go to solid mode, you won't be able to see your faces. That's because the solidified modifier is bringing out faces, and you're not able to select those faces that are out. But from here, if I go back to wireframe mode and turn on snapping, make sure you have snapping and proportional editing on, and you can start moving your snow around so that it's not a perfect circle again. And for this one, we might want to use the subdivision modifier. So go back to your panel, subdivision surface, and then you'll notice that it starts smoothing out the edges. Okay, let's go back and tweak the shape of this. So just based on your preference, you can start bringing in certain points of the snow. I would think since the roof is slanted, it would kind of loop down this way more than up here. So maybe I'll bring these faces down, or bring these up, and then bring the ones in the back a little bit downwards. In solid mode, sometimes you'll notice that the mushroom is sticking out more than your snow. If that's the case, just make sure you have a thicker layer for your snow. So I'm taking it to 0.1, and that's when I don't see the roof as much. Make it a little bit thicker. And I just want to pull out the chimney slightly. So GZ twice. Pull it out. And then if you want to tweak this further, make sure you have snapping enabled so it snaps to the surface. Then if I go to, yeah, it's a nice layer of snow on top. Okay, once you're at this point, let's go ahead and create this little lantern here. So I'm just gonna place my 3D cursor on the top right of the door, like so. And we're gonna use a curve this time. I don't know if we've used curves before, but it's a different type of object altogether. But let's go and create a curve, and let's go with a path this time. And I want to go into wireframe mode, front view, and I'm going to scale this down. It's way too long right now. And then bring it out. So it's just the tip of it kind of touching the wall there. And then if I go to edit, you'll see different types of vertices. These are not the vertices you usually see in 3D models, or the 3D models we've made so far. If I tweak, let me turn off snapping and proportional editing. If I tweak this, you'll notice there's two lines. So there's one which is orange, and then one that is just a solid black line. This solid black line is what you'll be seeing in the end result. So if I pull this down and then tab out, this solid black line is the one that remains. So you can think of this orange line as more of a guideline. If you've used the pen tool in Figma or Illustrator, you can think of this as the curves that stick out when you use the pen tool and start dragging things around. Though you see like guidelines for the curves, it's similar to that concept. But right now it does. I do want to make this more closer to a 90-degree angle. So you'll notice that there's a bit of an angle here, and in my render itself, it's a little bit curved. So to solve that, I just need to make more geometry between these two dots. So with these two selected, hit subdivide, and then same with this one here. And that way you have a nicer curve there that's closer to the orange line. And then if you think it's too long, go ahead and select everything on the outside that makes up that curve, and then bring it in. Actually, I might have brought it in too much. And then if I did want to increase that curve, I would have to do it proportionally. So this won't work. Okay, we'll have to bring this out together. If I brought this portion out, you want to make sure that you're doing it on this end too. Okay, something like this. And then let's go to solid view. So right now, if we rendered this out, this curve will show as nothing, like it's non-existent right now. We need to add some depth to it. So if you hit this object data properties, you'll notice this icon is different. That's because we're selecting a different type of object. So this mushroom is a 3D object. It's a mesh object. This one is a curve object. So you'll have different settings in this panel. What I want to do here is select geometry, and the one I want to increase is depth. So if I increase the depth, you'll get a nice bar. So you're just adding depth to that curve that we just created. And then by default, the Blender doesn't fill the edges, so we just want to fill caps. And then at any point, if you do want to make this into a mesh, let's say I wanted to add or extrude some parts of this metal bar, for example. You can't do that in a curve object. You would have to convert it to a mesh. And you can do that by selecting this, right click, convert to curve or mesh. So if I do mesh, there's no going back. Like you cannot convert this back to a curve. So what I usually just keep it as a curve until I'm really ready to edit it. But for the purpose of this, we're not making any edits, so I think it's fine as is. But let's bring the 3D cursor to this endpoint here. So select that, Shift S, and do cursor to selected. And we're gonna want to create another object here. So I'm gonna create a cylinder. And this one we won't need as much geometry, so 16 I think is suffice. And I want to scale this down. Maybe scale it out horizontally. Bring it down so that it sits at the end of our middle bar there. And then from here, let's create some loop cuts. Let's do 6 cuts. And select these top faces, or top 3 rows. Extrude along normals, Alt E. Extrude out. And if you've extruded out too much, you can scale it against the Y and X. And then I do want to bevel. Actually, let's turn on proportional editing. Select this outer loop here. And I just want to bring it down. And if we're zoomed in too much, you won't be able to see that circle. So just bring that circle in. Scale that in a little bit. And then for this loop in particular, I want to scale that in towards the middle of the mushroom. So right now, if I scaled this, it would scale horizontally, but I want to also bring it down as I do that. So you could just like scale it down, bring it down like this. But if I had to do it differently, I can bring the 3D cursor down to here and then scale it. So you don't have to do 2 actions at once. Or you're doing 2 actions at once, but you would have to do that separately if you wanted to scale and bring it down. So let's go back to medium point and scale this in, this top face. I'm going to create one more loop cut here and then scale that out, bring it up. And this mushroom doesn't have to be as elaborate as the main house we have. Bevel the edge here. And I think it's looking a bit big in my opinion, so I'm just gonna scale it down. Maybe scale it horizontally, like so. And then I'm just going to bevel the bottom edge here. And we get a nice mushroom. Feel free to tweak it further if you want. But I think we're going to call this done for now. Let me pull this down a little bit. Okay, shade smooth, auto smooth. And we have our nice lantern here. I'm gonna save again before I forget. Okay, with that done, I think the main frame of our house is done. It's just a matter of adding those spots here and there. We do want to add bricks later, but we won't do that now. We'll do that later in the polish phase. We have bricks on the base here and bricks on the chimney, so we'll do that in a little bit, or in the next few renders. And then for this one, I do want to at least cover the wooden base here. So for this one, we're gonna create one object, and we're gonna try to rotate it around the mushroom so it we don't have to manually create these wooden panels. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to isolate the mushroom and select the bottom face here. And I'm going to put the cursor to selected. And let's create a plane. Let's decrease that in size. Maybe decrease it along the Y. And then go into edit mode. What we want to do is keep the origin point here, but bring out the object instead. So to do that, just select the object, move it along the X, and you'll notice the origin point stays there in place. And this is looking slightly long, so I'm just gonna shorten that a little bit. Okay, this looks about right to me. Let's increase the width on the outer portion, like so. And then maybe I will bring this in a little bit more. If you notice here, there are gaps in between. I think that's fine. Just make sure that it's not too big of a gap. Once you've done that, extrude it out upwards. And for this one, let's go ahead and apply a bevel modifier. Increase the amount of cuts here. and I believe the scale value might be off. Let me see. Yeah, it is off. That's why I can tell by how the bevels are applying here. So to fix that, we just need to apply scale again, and you'll get a nice even bevel. I want to shade smooth. Maybe that's too much of a bevel. 0.015 for me. And then with this done, let's apply the array modifier. And let's set the factor to 0. Okay, once that's done, we're gonna create something that's called an empty object. So if you do Shift A, empty, I'm just gonna use the plain axis one. But this is just an object that is used to, if you wanted to anchor something to a empty object, that's what you do. This is, if you're familiar with After Effects, there's a concept of empty layers or empty objects. It's the same thing. You're just creating it so that you can parent certain things, or if you wanted to rotate it against something, you can use this empty object. And that's what we're going to be doing now. So once you've created that empty object, select the array modifier and let's increase that to, how many did I have? Six, 12. Okay, let's say about 36 for now. And then you wanna check this option here, object offset. And then if you use the drop down, you can scroll down and select empty, but I'm just gonna use the eyedropper tool. And if you hover over, you'll see the object's layer name. So I've done object, I've selected that object. And then if I rotate the empty, so if once I've anchored this to the empty object and then I rotate the object, you'll notice that the wood panels start propagating out. And I want to rotate it 360 degrees. So hit R, Z, 360. Actually, no, not 360. Let me see. Okay, degrees don't really matter, I guess. So just increase the, or rotate it so that the starting panel and the end panel meet at one point. And maybe 36 is too much. Also, I think the panel itself is a little thick. Looking at this now, I do want to have some gaps in between the wood panels. So the good thing about array modifier is you don't have to tweak every single object. You just need to tweak that main base object. So if I went into edit mode and I did scale Y, you'll notice that it scales everything. And then from here, I can select that empty object again and rotate it along the Z. And if I hit shift, you can do some fine tuning. So just gonna bring it up to here, and looking at this now, it's minus 10 degrees. So I guess the angle doesn't matter, it's just you need to tweak that manually like so. But now you have the base here. And if I go back to the main view, if I hit slash on my keyboard again, we're gonna have to move this up. So select everything except for the two background layers. And I'm just gonna bring that up. And from here, I'm just gonna create these wooden pillars beneath these here. So select a point in your panel where you want to create it. So maybe I'll create one. I believe there's one here behind the barrel, so I'll create one there. And I'm gonna do Shift A, cylinder, reduce this to 8 because we're not gonna be seeing this much, and just scale it down. And increase it in height, bring it down. And if you want, you can make this the same pillar that goes inside and out, like it kind of extends out, and then we can wrap the ropes around that too. But when I was creating this, I decided to keep them separate, so that's what I'll do for now. I'm just gonna shade smooth that and duplicate it in the top view. So if you hit numpad 7, go to top view, wireframe, select that pillar, and whatever movement you do, it's gonna go, you're constraining it against the X and Y. It's not gonna move in Z because we're in top view. So let's just duplicate that. And I'm just gonna create a couple with maybe 6 in between, 6 wooden panels that don't have it. So I'm just duplicating it and placing it in other places. And this is where I kind of faked it. So at the end of the day, when I was creating this render, I had to move this house out, so a little bit further away from the camera, like so. And I wasn't able to place these underneath. Like you can, but it's just not going to be sitting on a ground plane, which is fine. I think it's not going to be seen anyways. Okay, and then now we're gonna do the same thing with the top, these wooden pillars here. So we're just gonna copy one up, and I'll keep that one here. I did make these thinner in the render, so you'll notice this one's thicker, this one's thinner. I will keep it the same this time. I want to make sure I auto smooth this because this is sticking out and is more noticeable. And this one, let's do the same thing. Go into wireframe view, and I'm gonna make, so I have 2 wooden panels in between, so I'll do the same thing here. And I just realized as I'm doing this, I could have used the same array method that I use for the panels. And this one doesn't exactly match, but I'll just put one here. Place this one here. And then maybe somewhere in the back where I don't see it, I'll have to make it uneven. Okay, so at this point I don't think I'll see it, so I'll just place one here. Okay, so from the front view, it'll seem like it's two panels in between, but in the back it's not. So we have 4 minutes left. I want to wrap it up here for today. Were there any questions in particular on how to do certain things? Anything you were curious about in the next renders? How do you create the even spacing of the wooden panels? So I think what you did is your panel was not perfectly aligned with your empty object when you created it. So if let me see if I can recreate that. Let me start over actually. So if I go ahead and hide everything. So what I did first is create that plane. And then I brought the object out in edit mode. Created the empty layer, and if it seems like based on your screenshot, I feel like your object was a little bit outwards like this, so it's not it wasn't parallel with this empty object. So I think at this point it might make sense to just recreate that. Yeah, I would just go ahead and make sure that you, like, before you're creating this, make sure your 3D cursor is on the center of this. So if you just do Shift S cursor to selected, it should snap to the center. And then from there, you can add a plain object, an empty object, and then make sure that those two are aligned, and then follow the steps afterwards. Yes, the object origin is on the empty. Stone tablet on the left. Icon on it bevel or some kind of... Oh, so that's just an icon. So I imported an SVG, added some depth. And I could have textured it, but for the sake of this render, I didn't. No, they are the same, but when I say SVG, I imported it as a 3D model, and then I added depth to it. Whereas you could texture it too. So if I wanted to go into texture paint, import a SVG onto the plane, then I can do that. But what I've done is just imported the SVG and added some depth to it, which is a pretty useful technique if you're a designer, because sometimes you want to create a 3D logo of your company logo. If I had to give you an example, or just to showcase that briefly, let's see. Oh, I might have the icon in here actually. So if I do File, Import, SVG, and Assets. Yeah, this one. SVGs will be imported very small, so you just want to make sure you select it in here and scale it up before you do anything. And then from this point, you just have to add depth to it. Whoa, not depth, extrude. Then you get a nice 3D logo or 3D icon. Yes, we will be doing, we'll cover this icon. Well, I kind of covered it right now. But if you want, we can do an in-depth on that. There's nothing much to it. You just need to import it, add depth, and then there's a default material that gets applied to SVGs. You just need to change that to like a, let's say a white one if your company logo is white. But yeah, that's it for this session. It seems like there's no other questions. Feel free to use your own time and tweak your base models. Feel free to go ahead and create the other stuff too. If you wanted to try creating the barrel or the steps, I think that's pretty straightforward. The mushrooms as well. Like these are just mini versions of the house, except it's not tilted on an angle. So feel free to go ahead and create stuff if you want. Next week we're gonna finish up this house. We're gonna create these trees and then create the water. And I think we'll have time to do the other environmental stuff here. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks for coming everyone and have a good week.